Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 92, we sit down with winemaker and artist Kip Bedell. Kip takes us back to his roots, sharing stories of his ancestry and growing up in West Hempstead, New York. From his time in college to being drafted into the Army in 1968, he recounts his time stationed at Fort Bragg as an accident investigator. He then returns to his family business in West Hempstead and the decision to purchase land in Cutchogue in 1979. What began as a hobby, making wine in his Garden City basement, grew into something much larger as Kip planted his first vines in Cutchogue and navigated the challenges of the emerging North Fork wine scene. By the mid-90s, Bedell Cellars earned the prestigious title of Merlot of the Year from Wine Spectator magazine. Kip reflects on the evolution of the wine industry locally and the changes he witnessed in the North Fork region over the decades. After selling Bedell Cellars, Kip continued as the winemaker for 17 more years. But today he's returned to another passion, painting and drawing, a love he discovered in high school. Kip shares what he finds fulfilling about life on the North Fork today and his hopes for the future of this special place. So I hope you enjoy episode 92 with Kip Bedell. This episode was recorded September 5th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, sounds like fun.
And so I'd like to start off in the beginning, if you could give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised.
Sure. I was born and raised in West Hempstead, back in Nassau County. And I lived there all my life on Long Island. I had a great childhood there. I mean, it was, I grew up and went to school in the 50s and early 60s. I mean, it was a different time. And so, our parents would let us out in the morning and say, come back for dinner kind of a thing, And we rode our bikes to school and no locks on the bikes, and it was a different time. But I mean, I had a great childhood, and I really moved from two houses in West Hempstead while I was a child. So I was there my whole period up until college and Army. And then when I got out, my wife and I moved to Garden City. And we lived there for 22 years before we came out this way.
Okay. Now, in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go on either of your parents' side?
Yeah, I can. On my father's side, Bedell, I go back to a Stephen Augustus Bedell, which was my great grandfather, and he lived in Brooklyn. So there's a direct lineage from Stephen Augustus up into a couple more Augustus and Stevens, and my grandfather was Stephen. Well, he moved out from Brooklyn when he was younger, and he settled in West Hempstead. And that's how our family came to live in West Hempstead. He was a pretty successful guy. He was a businessman and a builder. He built, I think, about 30 houses in the Hempstead and West Hempstead area. He started a company, which my father ran, and I eventually ran a fuel oil company in West Hempstead. And he also started and was a president of the West Hempstead Bank, National Bank. So it was kind of cool. He was quite an entrepreneur. So, but I had some people that were interested in the genealogy end of that, and they asked me if I do a DNA, and I said sure. And this was a person was actually a cousin, ended up being a cousin. We weren't sure at the time, but she was trying to go back, and she actually traced the Bedells in our lineage with the DNA to Essex, England, in the 1600s. Mm-hmm. So at some point, they obviously came over, and a branch that started in Brooklyn, and that's, you know, I mean, I'm sure you know a little bit about genealogy, but it's like, you know, back in the 1800s, people had 10, 12 kids, you know, 15 kids. And of course, then they all split, and then they all get married and have 10 kids. It's
hard to trace it.
It gets crazy in a big hurry, you know. So
yeah.
But anyway, that's about what I know about our lineage.
Okay. And now, did your dad grow up in Hempstead?
Yes, he grew up in West Hempstead. Yeah.
West Hempstead.
Yeah.
What about your mom?
My mom is from Hightstown, New Jersey. And my parents met when he went to Petty School in Hightstown. It's a prep school. And they met there, and, you know, so eventually got together and got married. And so, yeah.
And do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother and an older sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now you mentioned that you grew up in Hempstead all the way through school. I think you mentioned a little bit about the neighborhood, but how would you describe that area? You mentioned some of the activities you would do, but was it pretty, was it a suburban?
It was, yeah, it was a suburban area. It was I would say it's, you know, kind of like I don't want to say Levittown, because it's not like all the houses were the same. They're all actually all different houses, but it was a community with, you know, plenty of, you know, mostly street after street of houses, and that's kind of where I grew up. But I mean, it was, you know, we jump on our bikes and ride to the, you know, corner candy store, and, you know, it was kind of a fun time to grow up, I think. I mean, it's a different time now. I mean, it's not, I'm not saying it's not fun to grow up now. It's just different because it's...
there's some things you can't do now that just with the different times.
Right.
Now, what about schooling for you? For elementary, middle school?
Yeah, I was in... elementary school through 6th, and then at 7th grade I went to the West Hempstead High School, and after 7th grade, my grades weren't all that great. I guess my parents didn't like my grades, so they decided they were going to put me in a private school. So we looked at a couple, and I'll never forget looking at St. Paul's. I don't know if you've ever heard of St. Paul's in Garden City, but it's a big kind of cathedral-like building. And I walked into the front door, and it was really like a castle, and it was dark and dingy. And so, I mean, the whole place wasn't like that, but that's the lasting impression I got. And when we left there, I told my parents, I'm not going there. And but we also looked at the Waldorf School in Garden City, and which was actually a Steiner school. I don't know, and it's a little bit of a different education. They definitely put an emphasis on the arts, and I mean, they had the emphasis not just on fine arts like painting and sculpting, which they did, but they also was big on the music and dancing and whatever. And which was one of the things that really introduced me, you know, to painting and drawing and stuff like that. They used to have a main lesson, so that you would go for 3 weeks and you would concentrate for an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes in the morning on your main lesson, whether it be history or biology or whatever. And at the end of that 3 weeks, they would expect you to do a notebook that had your notes in it or drawings or whatever the subject pertained to. And they also encouraged you, although it wasn't required, or it wasn't graded either, to, you know, design a cover or something. You could paste something from a magazine on it, or you could make a drawing or painting or whatever you would do. But they encouraged that, but it wasn't, they didn't mark your grade for that one way or the other. But I always enjoyed doing it and doing a drawing or something on it. But anyway, that's where I finished. I graduated from Waldorf.
And would you say your main interest was in the arts, or in terms of classes you gravitated towards, or subject matter?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly got my best grades in art, probably.
Yeah.
Art and gym, I guess. Well, I'm just kidding. But I mean, yeah, I definitely, sort of gravitated towards that. And I, in fact, entered college. I was accepted at Stetson University in Florida, and I entered it as a fine arts major, thinking that I didn't have the delusion that I was going to be make a living as an artist, doing painting and stuff. But I did think that I may be interested in going into either architecture or something in that field that I could use my art. And I was there for a week and went through with my counselors and that stuff, trying to work out courses. And after talking to them and stuff, I changed to from fine arts to business administration, and that's what I got my degree in, which was probably the smartest thing I did. So, it was just a realization that it's like wanting to be a rock star or something. It's not many people are successful at that.
Yes. And that switch to come to Florida, were you thinking of that you wanted to leave New York, or were you open to other?
I think, look, I was, what was I? I was 18 years old or something. I thought that was pretty cool, going to Florida. I brought my surfboard with me, in fact, so yes. Yeah, well, of course, I think at that time you want to get out of the house, and you want to be on your own. And it was, I got accepted to several colleges, I guess, but it was, that's the one I picked, which was a lucky thing because that's where I met my wife, my future wife. So that was a good choice.
Yes. And then after graduating, I don't know if we're jumping a bit here, but, and then in terms of when you came back to New York?
Yeah, well, I actually, the big picture is that I was at Stetson for a year and a half, and I actually was surfing more than I was studying. So they asked me to take a semester off and think about it. So I actually, instead of doing that, a friend of mine said, you ought to apply to Mitchell College in New London. It's a 2-year school that starts purposely, I think, a week or 10 days later than most of the colleges. So I applied there and got into Mitchell. I didn't have to sit out a semester. I got my associate degree at Mitchell and then transferred to George Washington University in D.C. And that's where I ended up getting my degree eventually.
Within business?
In business, yeah.
Business.
Yeah.
Okay.
And from there, I was drafted into the Army. That was in '68, which was a kind of a scary time,
For Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in from '68 to '70s, but I unfortunately did not have to go to Vietnam. But
where were you stationed?
I was stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. At the time, and it's most younger people don't understand, really about Vietnam at the time, but there was all kinds of protests and stuff, and people, hated this war, and it was a huge mistake. The whole war was a huge mistake. But when I was drafted, and it was you couldn't get out of the draft. It was bone spurs didn't do it. I can tell you that. But
or they would say the Dodgers that went to Canada, or they tried to. Some people would go to some other within college or something to kind of that would get them out of the draft, maybe.
Yeah, but I was, you could only be in college so long, and that didn't work anymore. And then yeah, some people didn't know any personally, but some people did move to Canada, and eventually they let him come back, and they didn't, prosecute him for desertion or anything. But but I was assigned to a special MP unit. It was a riot control unit at Fort Bragg. And we were all scared. For the first year you're in the Army, you were afraid you were going to get sent to Vietnam. And after a year, when you only had less than a year left, then the chances became much less because the tours were for a year in Vietnam. But I didn't know it at first, but we slowly started to realize that this unit that I was in was never going to go anywhere, because they needed him for riot control, which, of course, it was a lot of riots at the time, too. So they had riots in Washington and L.A. and all kinds of stuff. And they sent this unit.
Where you were sent?
I actually was not sent.
But
and
parts of the unit
because,
were...
the other great thing that happened while I was in that unit was that I was there for maybe a month or so, doing like routine patrol and stuff, and we were on base unless we were called. The unit was called somewhere, and so we did routine patrol and that kind of stuff. But after a month, I was called down to the provost marshal's office, and they wanted me to be an accident investigator. So this was great duty. I mean, there was 6 of us. And we worked in pairs, and we worked 12 hours, 6 to 6, and then 12 hours, 6 to 6 at night, and then we were 3 days off. We worked 3, 3, and 3, so that's why there were 6 of us rotated. And I basically didn't have to go to my company at all. And I got out of all the activities because I was needed as an accident investigator. That's what I did for a year and a half at Fort Bragg. So it was if you had to be in the Army, it was great duty. And
yes,
we were busy. It was a lot of accidents there, but that was just interesting work.
Yes. And then what were you thinking after you were out of the Army?
I got out. I actually got married right before I got drafted. So after my training and stuff like that, my wife moved down, and we lived in a trailer down there in North Carolina, and we had our first boy while we were in the Army. He cost about $10, I think, for some incidentals or something. And so when we got out, and I went right into family business, which was the fuel oil business in West Hempstead. And that's where I was for 20 years, I think.
Okay. So and then you were living in Garden City.
We lived in Garden City. And then, then 1979, we bought a piece of property out here in Cutchogue. And I was already making wine at that time, as a hobby.
Okay.
And then the Hargraves started, and we went out, talked to them. They were very nice and friendly. Told us what they were doing and stuff. And we went out, helped them pick one year, and I bought some fruit from them actually, and from Dave Mudd, one of the old growers, and made the wine in my basement in Garden City. And so anyway, it was that was in '79. So I still worked for the fuel oil company for 10 more years. We actually planted in 1980 at Bedell, and the first planting was in 1980. And so for 10 years, from 80 to 90, I was sort of running back and forth. Fortunately, we had a house on the property that we bought, so we had a place to stay there. But it was kind of a crazy 10 years. It was the first 5 years were pretty good because we were just planting and selling fruit. But then in '85, we made our first wines. And then, of course, I was, the harvests are crazy at time in the fall. And but it worked pretty well for the fuel business because we were the busiest in the winter, and the vineyard is the busiest in the summer and the fall. So the two businesses kind of worked together. But after a while, when we got up in the late '80s and stuff, my wife and I said that something's got to give here. Either I can't keep doing both of these. I was working 7 days a week, and so we decided. Well, we thought the winery was going to be successful, and we decided to sell the fuel oil business and move out here.
Well, I was curious, even as a child, or had you visited the South Fork or North Fork at all?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So actually, my grandfather, Stephen Bedell, owned a house in Mattatuck on the bay. And, we came out there. I came out as an infant. I got some pictures of me, kicking on the sand and stuff. So I have very fond memories of that house and coming out there and going fishing with my dad and stuff. And so I have great memories of this area for sure.
And what did you think of the area when you came out and when you purchased the property in 79? Was that 79?
Yeah, 79, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, was there a gap in terms of the last time you come out, and had the area had changed at all?
Yeah, well, I don't think so much. I mean, certainly from when I was a child coming out here, and I certainly remember, like in Mattatuck, the movie theater was that Quonset hut that's now a store there, and the Five and Dime there and stuff. So it was a much smaller, quieter. Nobody watered their lawns, or it was kind of like a real beachy kind of a vibe. And so obviously that changed from when I was
from 70, yes,
and until 1979 and 80 when we first came out here, but not as much as it's changed from 80 to 2024. I mean, now it's it's even more more people now, for sure.
Well, what attracted you specifically to Cutchogue? Were you looking at other areas even further east?
We were looking, in the general area, not specifically Cutchogue, but the weird thing was that when we first started talking about this, about getting a piece of property, it was a hobby, the winemaking, and we kind of said, well, let's look for a little place where maybe got 5 acres and we could grow some grapes from my hobby, and we could have a place to go out and summer home, and I don't know, somehow or other there it went from 5 acres and we bought 50. So we're not quite sure how that happened.
What was there before? Was it a potato farm?
It was the Davids farm. It was a vegetable farm. And they had a farm stand that was still sitting there, abandoned, but it was right on the main road. And they sold vegetables, potatoes. Of course, they did potatoes and cauliflower and that kind of stuff. But I mean, it was a working farm. And actually, after we bought it, we still rented part of the farm that we hadn't planted to Johnny Zaveski, who was our next door neighbor, and he was basically a potato farmer, but he grew some vegetables too. So he rented for years the back of my property and planted that.
And you mentioned you talked to the Hargraves. Were there any other people that you knew at that time starting to plant?
Well, I did talk. This is before we actually bought this. I talked to the Hargraves, and I also talked to Dave Mudd. He was just a grower. I don't know if knew Dave Mudd or not, but he was a pretty influential guy in the planting out here. And in fact, he got so many people that came to talk to him that he started charging and set up a consultation, which of course is still going with his son Steve.
Oh.
And but after we planted that first year, 1980, there were, I think, 4 of us. There was definitely Pindar, Lenz, Peconic Bay, which was Ray Blum, and maybe one other one that planted that same year. We all planted 1980. Mm-hmm. So we all talked to each other. I mean, in fact, Lenz and myself went together and bought grapes from the same guy that year. So the early days. I mean, we shared equipment and all the mistakes we made, and
so were there some, even throughout the 80s, some challenges just with the harvest and just learning on the go?
Yeah, it was pretty much learning on the go, because you could read all the books you want, to talk to all the experts you want from California or upstate or whatever. Each growing area is unique. And they have similarities and stuff like that, but each place is a microclimate, and it has its own needs, and so we made a lot of mistakes, and we tried different trellising methods, and we tried different spacing between the vines and between the rows, and so there was a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes, and but we learned from making mistakes, and I think it was probably from about the late 80s when really things started to change, because we started to realize that, hey, you really got to get in there and you have to hedge the vines so they don't just grow over and cover up the fruit and shade the fruit. And we realized you have to leaf pull and expose the bunches so that they don't so they get sunlight, they don't stay wet, and which promotes mildews. And so we started doing all these things, and I'll tell you, the wines of the 90s were like miles ahead of the wines we made early in the 80s. So it was a huge jump in the quality of the wines in the 90s. And I think that's really what turned the tide of the recognition of Long Island wines.
And what were your initial vines or grapes that you used initially in that?
You mean the varieties?
The variety, I mean.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. So we planted quite a few things that first year. I planted Gewürztraminer, I planted Riesling, Chardonnay, Merlot, some Cabernet, and I planted some Zinfandel, which I really liked. And I had made quite a bit of Zinfandel by buying California grapes. And this is when I was a hobby in my basement. And California grapes in Brooklyn. And so I tried Zinfandel, but it was not good for this area. It turned out, because they're very thin skinned, and I have these big beautiful bunches. When they started to get ripe, they get soft, and they just kind of, you get a rain and they fill with water and just dissolve. I mean, it was just like, I never really got a harvest that I could really make wine out of with my Zinfandel. But that was, the other ones actually have done pretty well. I mean, we have to do different trellising and vineyard work for the different varieties, but I think most of the most of the wineries out here now really have gotten a pretty good handle. It's not that we're not going to still continue to improve and stuff, but I think we've gotten a pretty good handle on what grows really well here. They're still trying new varieties. Even at Bedell now, they've planted several new varieties over the last few years. So it's an ongoing experiment.
Yes. And did you move out here fully in '86, no, not that you've moved out here fully, but started more of the full-time winery within the mid '80s, because you said initially you were starting it as a hobby, but then it started to grow more, and every summer into the mid '80s grew.
I made my first wines commercially in '85.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we planted in '80, and we had a small crop in '82 that we sold to local wineries, and then we had crops in '83, '84, which I sold, and of course I used some too to make wine and to get a feeling from my own grapes. But and then '85, we actually sold half our crop, but we made wine from half that crop, and that was our first commercial harvest.
What would you say the quantity of bottles you would be selling? How many per year? Or...
Yeah, well, of course that first year we started off with maybe I don't know, 1,000 cases or 500 cases. I don't know, not much. And we got up, well, before I sold the winery in 2000, we were up to, well, about 10,000 cases a year. So it's probably a little more now because the new owner bought additional property with grapes, so they had a little better supply. But I've also bought some fruit, and when I was still the owner, we had to buy some fruit from different growers in the area. So,
and even going into the '90s, did it seem like it was where you could make a profit in it, or was it still a struggle?
Well, the winery. A winery is not a get rich quick scheme,
Yeah.
But it's we were making money when I would say the last 5 years of my ownership, from like 95 to 2000 or something, we were making money. I was taking a salary, and we had a big crew and whatever. But it's I was also running the whole business and running all the finances and everything else. So I was keeping pretty close track of everything, and yes, you can make money in this business. I mean, the biggest question mark is you're kind of at the mercy of nature, and any given year, you just never know what could happen. And we went through actually 2 hurricanes while I still owned it, and that was kind of a scary thing. Although we still got the fruit in, and we had a decent harvest, but it could have been a different story too. So you never know.
And when did you see that they were starting to, in terms of attracting more customers and things being written in papers or people coming out from New York City? Did you start initially like a wine tasting room type environment where they would try to get people to come in?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we had the first year we sold wines, which was like '86. So we had an old barn on the property that we actually converted into the winery. And the front part of it was still, I mean, we cleaned it all up and built a bar, but that was our tasting room. And well, the first year though, we didn't even have the bar. I had a picnic table set up, and I put the bottles of wine on, and we had some people come in, and so it was that was kind of thrilling. But certainly, I would say, from when we opened in '86 up and through '90s, we started doing events and stuff. I mean, it was a steady group of people coming out to the winery, visiting the winery, and we started doing events where we barrel tastings and mid-bloom picnics and that kind of thing, which attracted quite a few people and stuff. And of course, it just kept growing and growing and growing, and I think it's still growing.
Yes, and even with all the publicity, and would you still get some negative things, whether it was from people from other wine areas or from New York City saying, "What are you doing on the North Fork with this wine?" And
of course, it's like, wine tasting obviously is a very personal thing. And I don't care if it's wine tasting or eating fish or soup or whatever else. I mean, it's a personal thing, so some people love a particular wine, and some people are going to not like that wine or hate that wine, and that's just a matter of taste. Now, were there prejudiced? Yeah, I think there were, certainly in the early days, because the biggest complaint that I ever heard was that the wines were overpriced, and maybe they were in the early days because maybe the quality wasn't quite up to what their bottle price was. Of course, we had tried to set the bottle price to try to make some money, not to overcharge somebody. But I think that certainly all the way through the '90s and through the 2000s, the wine quality is, I mean, the wine quality of Long Island wines now is as good as any place in the world, and it of course is a different. Yeah, it's a unique little area here, and our wines probably taste a little different than New Jersey or California or wherever else, but there's no question that the quality of the bottle is there, and I think they're priced accordingly, and I think the prices are fair for the wines now. Now, I have no vesting in the winery now when I'm saying this, because I retired. I didn't have it even when I still worked there after I sold it, but I retired in 2017, and so I'm not even working there now. But I worked after I sold it in 2000. I worked for 17 years for Michael Lynn, who bought it, which he was a great employer, and I had a great time. And but I think now that the quality of Long Island wines is top notch. But you always have detractors. I mean, you always have somebody that says it stinks, and that's the way it is, whether it's wine, politics, or whatever.
Yes. And you earned the Mr. Merlot from Wine Spectator magazine. When was that, and what was it about the Merlot that you think captured the attention?
I'm not 100% sure, but it was it was back in I think like the mid 90s, maybe early 90s, and I had sent a couple of wines to them for review and stuff, and one of them got a pretty high rating, and then they did an article on Long Island wines too, and some I think it was Tom Matthews came out and interviewed us and stuff, and So I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly who put that moniker on there, but it's just, I don't know, for some reason kind of stuck. And we did kind of, because I did plant Merlot early on, and then it was so successful, and it was one of our best sellers. I kept planting more and more, so I did become a fairly big producer of Merlot, and so I guess that's kind of where it came from. But
yes, and I think it's still. I think I don't know if you would say people go to Bedell for the Merlots today, even at least out of all the North Fork wineries.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they really do, but I mean it's. But I know they're making a lot of good wines there now, though. So
yes. And I think also in terms of just starting from the 80s up until even 2017, you mentioned just some of the improvements with the area, but what other aspects have you seen even in the wine industry that particularly has changed within the area, or either some other significant developments you've witnessed over that time?
Well, of course, today because the wines are so much better than they were in the 80s. I mean, in the 80s, for us to get our wines in a restaurant or even in a retail place was a real chore. I mean, we had to really work hard to get someone to take our wines and try them, and not only that they weren't any good. It's just that they didn't have a reputation. So that if somebody saw, a Bedell Merlot on the label or on the wine list, they don't know who that is, or whatever, and so they don't order it. And so, I think as the reputation increased and got better and better, it was much easier to get in to restaurants and places. Now, saying that, even way early on, people like John Ross and Tom Shadell and those guys that the chefs out here, they always kind of embraced the Long Island wines, and John took my wines early on, so which was great. And but it was a bit different story back west and in the city. That was a tougher grind. Today it's a much different story. I mean, we get people coming out calling us, and stuff, and look at for our wines. So,
and also, you mentioned that I mean, you collaborated with John with the restaurant, but did you collaborate with any of the other wineries throughout that time on
absolutely
things?
Yeah, I think we had a pretty tight-knit group of people that shared information. We early on started a grape growers group that got together on a monthly basis to discuss problems and legislative stuff and all that kind of stuff. And it's still going on. So we still have the wine council, and we also had a winemakers group that we met usually monthly, and a lot of times it was at John Ross's restaurant, and we'd all bring a bottle of wine, and one of the rules was you couldn't be a Long Island wine; it had to be something else, and we have in bags, and we talk about them and try to guess where they were from and stuff like that. But it was a very, very friendly, cordial group, and we shared ideas and stuff like that. So it was great, So,
and obviously, you probably didn't initially coming out here and starting it as a hobby. You didn't envision Bedell Cellars becoming what it is today at all.
No, we just it was, I mean, the first year, though, we planted 7 acres. So, I mean, it wasn't a hobby anymore, even immediately. You know, it was going to be a business.
Yeah.
And we had no idea. I think probably in the back of my mind, I figured, okay, well, we bought this 50 acres, and I said, if we're going to plant these grapes, and it was shown by that time, because the hard grapes started in 73, I think, or something. We knew that the grapes could grow here. We didn't know yet really how good a quality it was going to be. Although we knew they grew, we could ripen them and make some good wines, but we didn't know we could make great wines. We were hoping we could, but you know, it's I was figuring, okay, so if the whole thing doesn't work or whatever, we're not going to lose money on this land. I mean, you know, if they sell it for whatever we sell it for, I mean, we can always sell this property.
Yeah.
So I wasn't worried so much, although of course I didn't own the land. You know, I had a mortgage on it. But I mean, yeah, I wasn't really concerned too much about that. And as it turned out, the wines, you know, were really good, and they grew really well out here. And we planted. You know, year after year, we planted, we put in 1 or 2 acres, and it worked out. But we didn't know it at the time, that's for sure.
Yes. And I was curious, what advice would you give someone wanting to start in the wine industry today? I mean, it doesn't have to be particularly focused on the North Fork, but just in the general business.
Yeah, you know, the old saying is in the winery, if you want to make a small fortune, you start with a large one.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a big investment up front, for sure, unless you buy a working winery or vineyard. But we maybe did it a little differently back in 1980, and did a lot of it ourselves and stuff. But to me, it was a very exciting business, and what I really loved the most was the wine making. But the whole experience was just a great experience, and to be able to move out here with my family, and grow up, have the kids grow up out here and stuff. It's a beautiful place, and so you know, my wife and I are both very happy we made that decision to come out here. But it could have gone either way, I guess, but we were lucky. So.
And you said you sold it in 2000?
Yes.
Was there a particular reason that you decided at that time, and then you continued to still work in it, though?
No, we weren't for sale. I mean, we were going along. We were doing very well, and this fellow Michael Lynn, who was a owner of New Line Cinema, which was a movie production company, and they the best known film is Lord of the Rings. They did.
Yes.
So you know, he was a famous guy, and had lots of money, and he walked in one day and you know, said he's looking for a winery, and I said, well, I'm not for sale, you know. And so one thing led to another, and he kind of made me an offer that was just real tough to refuse. And
Yes.
and so he not only wanted to give me a real fair price for my winery, he wanted me to stay on as the winemaker. He gave me a 5-year contract to stay and make the wines. And the other key point that he made was that he wanted to make the best wines that he could, and he didn't care what it cost. Well, you know, I mean, we had to talk this over quite a bit and stuff, and we decided this is. I also talked to both my boys. Both my boys had worked in the winery, summer jobs, you know, and stuff like that, and but I asked both of them. I said, "You at all interested in working and taking over this winery someday?" And both of them said no. They had their own interest, and they're actually both doing very well on their own. And that made my, my decision much easier, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But so I sold in 2000. I made the wines for 5 years, and then he hired other winemakers, and I stayed for ended up being 17 years, mm-hmm. which was a great deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, looking more towards the future, specifically, what do you think are some of the challenges with making sure, or even what you see for the future of the wine region on the North Fork? And obviously, you said it can be a challenging business, just like even with farming and how that's changed, but just with the price of land, and then also making sure you can still make a profit from your product. In terms of even all the wineries out here, what do you think are some of the challenges?
Yeah, well, I think there's plenty of challenges. I mean, and as you say, it's the same with any business. And I think certainly the tourism that's coming out is certainly going a long way to supporting the wineries for sure. And just as they're supporting the farmers and with the farm stands and everything else. But probably, regulations are always an issue, and then weather, and we're certainly the global warming is certainly not hurting us at this point, but it's changing, I think, the nature sometimes of our fruit, the end result of our fruit. And but it'd probably be a long time before it really gets really too warm to do. But it's in other areas that they're already seeing some issues, like California is having strings of days of 100 degrees, and that's not good for grapes. They don't like that. The acid drops like a brick, and the sugar shoots up, and you don't have that long maturation time to build up the flavors in the fruit. And that was always our advantage here. And we've been seeing some warmer, temperatures here, and a little bit earlier harvest. And I think this year is a little bit ahead. But yeah, I don't know. And price of land is kind of ridiculous. I mean, think about what I paid for my property back in 1979 is kind of a joke, but it wasn't then. I mean, obviously prices were relative, but that's always a challenge too. I think we did early on in the early 80s, we sold our development rights to most of our property there, and so we used that cash that we got from it. Actually, we sold ours to Suffolk County. Now, of course, the town of Southold has a program also, but we used that cash to really build the winery and get new tanks and stuff like that. So that really helped us out. Plus, we preserved all that land that our vines are on that can never be developed.
Yes,
and certainly I'd like to see that continued or expanded. And I know the town is committed to the farmland preservation program, and we have the 2% tax that goes into that fund to fund that. And it would be great to even expand that more if it was any way to do that, because it'll preserve the open spaces here, which I think we need. I mean, that's what brings people out here. They want to look at the vistas and stuff. They don't want to look at a bunch of more houses.
No, and I think that helped at the time in the 80s and 90s when there was some pressure from development with some of the wineries popping up, and that's been able to keep open spaces here, whereas they were once farmlands, but now they're vineyards.
Yeah, there was one piece of land I looked at back in Cutchogue that was owned by a developer, and the housing market at the time was wasn't so great I guess it was 78 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about, and he wanted a price though that was higher than farmland. He wanted more of a development price. And I said, I'm not going to pay that, And so we never could come to an agreement. Mm-hmm. But that piece of property was developed into a whole housing development there. Mm-hmm. That's there today, So
yeah.
So yeah.
And then also, you, even from the winemaking, it could be after you had sold it in 2000 or in 2017. Did you start getting back into your artwork and painting?
Yeah, well...
or were you continuing to do that throughout the whole...
Yeah, it's... I wasn't able to really do any painting after I got out of college, pretty mm-hmm. much. No, it was the army, the family, working, and then when we started out here, I had no time mm-hmm. to do that. But the actually, most people think of winemaking as maybe a scientific kind of a thing where you have grape juice and you put yeast in and it ferments and you get wine, and it's like a formula or a scientific thing. Well, I think winemaking is really like 50% scientific, where you have to follow certain procedures and do certain things to make sure that the fermentation process is going to go correctly. But the other 50% of winemaking is artistic. Mm. And that's kind of where I plowed my artistic abilities when I was making wine. And there's just like thousands of things that you can do to change the outcome of a batch of grapes to the final bottle. And whether it's fermentation temperature or stainless steel or oak barrels or, just on and on and on. The yeast you use, wild yeast, commercial yeast, and it goes on and on. And you could pick plot of grapes. Let's say you had a plot of grapes that had 10 tons of grapes on it, and you gave 1 ton of grapes to 10 different winemakers. I guarantee you'd get 10 different wines. Now, they may have similarities and stuff like that, mm-hmm. but there'd be 10 different wines. And so that was where my art stuff went while I was making wine, while I had the winery. But when I retired in 2017, I kind of jumped back into the painting, and that's what I do now. I mean, that's not all I do, but I mean, it keeps me busy, and I'm having a lot of fun at it. I belong to the Old Town Arts and Crafts in Cutchogue. Mm-hmm. The little red house there, right in yes. downtown Cutchogue, and so I have my paintings there, and some of my paintings. But there's a lot of talented artists that do that. Bob probably talked a little bit about this too when yes. you talked to him, and we have potters that have great mugs and dishes and all kinds of pottery. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful stuff, and we have jewelry makers and people that do knitting stuff, and of course there's a fine art room where the watercolors, acrylics, oils, and some pastels, and then we have another room that's photography. So it's got a lot of neat stuff in there. So mm-hmm. I've been very happy working, with the guild, and I have a website, and so too, and I've been pretty, I've been selling paintings, which is great, which is
Nice.
it's like a bonus.
Yes. Definitely.
I also like to do charity stuff too.
Mhm.
So the Southold Historical Society always has a 10 by 10 thing. I always put paintings in that.
Mhm.
I just had a painting up at the Halleckville. They had a big barn raising thing, and I donated a painting to that. And so anyway, I'd like to do that local stuff too. So.
And is it more? What is your subject matter? What do you tend to focus on? A wide range of
North Fork.
North
What
Fork.
else? I mean, I do different stuff, but I mean, I do a lot of water scenes and boats and farm fields. And the amazing thing is that I've only done, I think, like 2 vineyard pictures in my entire time, and I don't know why that is. Maybe I just had enough of it. I don't
Like
know.
I've seen that image. I've seen that enough.
So, but yeah, it's just where we live here. It's just beautiful, and there's no lack of subject matter. That's for sure.
Yes.
And I tell you, that's what sells too.
Yes.
People want to,
They want
they
something
come out.
to-
They want to say, "Oh, it's a boat scene," So that's
Take that home with them.
yep.
And then also I'd like to ask people more just in general, separate from about the wines, just what you might hope for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line.
Well, I'd like to see things kind of continue as they are, and not. I would certainly like to see the housing growth stop, or slow way down. And it's not that we don't need affordable housing. We do need some of that, because we got a lot of workers out here that can't afford to live anywhere. And but there was like everybody that lives out here saw what happened during COVID and afterwards, and everybody came out from the city and whatever after COVID, during COVID, and then they kind of never left, and it's just sort of really gotten busier and busier here. And we actually have you sometimes have to wait for 2 traffic lights to get through a traffic light in here on Fridays or something. So
Yeah.
but it's also bringing business out here, and I think it's helping certainly the economy on the North Fork.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, and but it'd be nice if it could kind of stay the way it is, because I certainly, if I go back to my childhood coming out here and stuff, it was much different.
It was even more what you would call more rural.
Much more rural.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
we don't want to. We've already lost some of that. We don't want to lose more.
absolutely, yeah. So that would be nice. And as I mentioned before, I think certainly the farmland preservation is certainly helpful in that, and the more we can do in that, the better. And but I don't know. It's a tough thing.
Yeah, it's tough to balance housing and tourism and land preservation, and then the character of the area, and trying to supply all of that, while also, I think one of the other things people talk about is just the resources and being overwhelmed of what the town can handle, and that we might not even be able to handle. Just whether people want growth, it's like it could be a challenging thing in terms of how that would be, and then also you can also talk about the environment and what that might have as an impact on the environment as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously the more people you need, the more water you need, the more cars there are, and everything else, and That just is a downward spiral. So it's tough. I don't have any answers to that, So I mean,
it's what
I wish I did, but
it's like I don't.
One thing I was very happy was to see Al Krupski get elected to supervisor, as I've known him for a long time when he was really a farmer, and of course he was just down the road from me, so I used to know him pretty well. But he's a sharp guy, and if anybody is an environmentalist, he is, and I'm happy to see him running the town because I think he's going to do a good job, and as good a job as anybody can do. Let's put it that way with what we're faced with. So
yes,
we'll see what happens, and yes. I mean, I think this. Like all these hotels that want to be built and stuff, I just think that's not a good thing. It's, could we use a little extra housing? Sure, we could. But I mean, you can go with the B&Bs and some small little things and stuff like that. But the big things that want to build is not a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. No, and then I usually just ask at the end if there was anything else you wanted to say or discuss that we haven't talked about.
Well, I don't know. We covered quite a bit.
I think we covered almost everything.
Yeah, my entire life. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
Okay.
I've enjoyed talking to you, and
yes,
going over, hashing over some of the stuff. So it's been fun.
Thank you. No, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story, as well as just starting this as a hobby and blossoming into a winery, and what it's become today was really nice to hear as well. Yeah. So thank you for coming. So now I'm
trying to blossom my artwork into another business too. So, which will be my last business, I think. So,
thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 92 with Kip Bedell. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.